All right, good evening, fellow protectors. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. I'm Greg LeBoeuf, got Dustin Dovery with us, Brad Vandelite. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I think this is going to be I always look forward to the podcast, obviously, but I think tonight's going to be an interesting conversation. And so I'll read the title of it, then I'm going to read a couple quotes, and then we'll cut to the intro, and then we're going to come back and we're going to break it down and discuss it. So I titled this one, Teaching Criminals to Fear Their Victims. And so the first quote that I want to read you is from Colonel Jeff Cooper. And for those that might not be familiar, just a very famous, one of the kind of forefathers of, tactical firearms training. And so he wrote this, or he said this. He said, "If violent crime is to be curbed, it is only the intended victim who can do it. The felon does not fear the police, and he fears neither judge nor jury. Therefore, what he must be taught is to fear his victim." And then I'm going to read a second quote, but I'm only going to read part of the quote, but it'll make sense. I don't have one right in front of me. I don't think here. Let me take a quick look. Yeah, I don't have a copy of Barry Holland's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, which is kind of the definitive guide to protecting yourself, family, and property here in Canada. Barry's an associate friend of mine and just a mentor, and just wrote an amazing book helping to empower Canadians as to what their legal rights are. And in the very beginning of the book, he has on one page just a small paragraph on one, it's a big book, just on one page. And basically it says at the top of it, attention to criminals. And it kind of, just to paraphrase the first part of it, the first sentence or two, Barry, when writing the book, got a certain amount, I won't say a lot, but he got a certain amount of criticism where people, said or expressed concern that criminals would use his book and use that information to their own advantage. To which Barry's kind of reply was, I thought, just really, really awesome, and it kind of echoes what Colonel Cooper said. So I'm just going to kind of read out, starting from maybe the third line in, where he just picks up and he says, "If they do read this book, it should strike fear into their heart. They will realize that private persons have a lot of power, and with the information and instruction in this guide will result in the criminal getting caught, going to jail, getting their ass kicked, or spending the rest of their worthless life on a feeding tube or dead. If those outcomes don't appeal to the criminal, they must stop committing crime, turn themselves in, admit to their crimes, accept their punishment, and turn their life around." So I want to kind of explore this topic of, teaching criminals to fear their victims. And so I'm going to cut to the intro. I'll let you guys process what I just shared, and then we're going to come back and we're going to break this down. Stick with us, guys. Every day I hear more stories of good people being brutally assaulted and murdered by some individual who has a repeat history of violent offenses, drug addiction, and mental health issues, who is free to walk the streets in the same city where I live, work, and where I am raising my two daughters. Well, I'm tired of screaming at the TV, and enough is enough. Throughout history, there have always been men willing to answer the call to the threats against our way of life. Well, today, that threat is right outside our doors, on our streets, in our neighborhoods, on our public transportation system, outside the places we work, and even outside of our children's schools. My new mission is to create and train a group of men that believe in the right to life and value the freedom a man has to protect his life, his family, and his property. I'm Greg LeBoeuf. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. All right, okay. Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us. Real quick, if you missed the setup prior to cutting to the intro, tonight's podcast is on teaching criminals to fear their victims. I shared a quote from Colonel Jeff Cooper, and I also shared a quote out of Barry Holland's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. I think this is powerful. And matter of fact, I just want to start, I'm going to jump right in right from the beginning of Colonel Jeff Cooper's quote. And I'm just going to repeat it real quick for those that may join late. But if violent crime is to be curbed, it is only the intended victim who can do it. The felon does not fear the police, and he fears neither judge nor jury. Therefore, what he must be taught is to fear his victim. So I want to go to the first line. If violent crime is to be curbed. Now, again, I think this is just a great place to start, because what you have to first acknowledge then is that crime is a problem. Violent crime is a problem. And I think that, we could easily, go down rabbit holes of, where we feel our criminal justice system is. We could talk about bail reform. We can talk about, the mandates in prisons and whether rehabilitation is effective or not. Like, you can go down a whole lot of rabbit holes with all that kind of stuff, and those are worthy conversations. However, I think just starting with if violent crime is to be curbed. So I think right there, each person has to make a decision and answer that question. Is there violent crime? Do you feel like it affects you? Because there's still, I mean, obviously in my line of work, like what we do here, I meet a lot of people, and the majority of the people that I meet, they strongly believe that things are getting worse out there. Now, these aren't people that are running around checking every and cross-referencing every statistic you can possibly have. These are just people that live their lives every single day in a city and in a country where they are seeing drug addiction, mental health problems, the release of repeat, violent offenders. I mean, they're living the reality. Ride the LRT, take the public transit, go downtown and go for a walk. You know what I mean? It's just go out of your own neighborhoods. And homelessness and drug addiction and open drug use. I mean, these are just problems people are seeing all over the place. So most people, or many people in my circle of influence anyhow, feel that crime is getting worse, and therefore they would probably agree. I can't speak for them directly, but that violent crime does in fact need to be curbed. And having said that, they would then, that statement kind of reflects on the fact that society and the kind of checks and balances that we have in place are failing to curb violent crime. So I kind of want to start just there off that, and what your guys' opinion is on everything I said, but also just on, whether or not we feel like violent crime does in fact need to be curbed.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say you guys are fucking talkative tonight.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute. I have elephants up. I live with elephants, um, so no, I agree. Like, it does need to be curbed, and I think that we've said in the past, be careful what your experiences teach you, right? And but that works for us, and it also works for violent criminals. And based on the quotes, like, hey, like we need to be the ones curbing the violent criminal assaults. And right now I think that we have an environment which is not curbing violent assault, which is actually kind of breeding violent assault, because there's very little fear for the violent criminal to be like, oh, who's going to stop me, right? I could just do whatever I want and nobody could stop me. So I think that where we're at is there is fear of repercussion, right? Obviously with the legal system and bail reform, and then I think there's very little fear from the victim of standing up for themselves. So with the experiences that we're teaching people how to treat us. We're teaching violent criminals that it's okay to assault us because we're not going to do anything. Right? I'm saying us as a general population, but I'm not saying as a society, right? So it's like, well, why do we think violent criminal assault is on the rise? Because they don't fucking care. Because their experience have taught them that, like, 9 times out of 10, ain't nobody doing shit, right? So I think that it's very accurate to say that that is the exact environment that we find ourselves in.
Okay, Dustin.
Yeah, I I agree with both of you guys. As far as violent crime needing to be curbed, I mean, go find the family of a victim of violent crime and ask them, is one violent crime one too many? Like, yeah, of course it is. Like, okay, when it's not you, you can put the blinders on and pretend it's not happening, but at the end of the day, it is. Like, open the newspaper, look online, like, look at your phone, watch the news. Like, it's sad but true, but you can't deny it. Not anymore, and it for sure is happening more and more, and it's unfortunate, but it is. So 1,000% it needs to be curbed. And then, yeah, to that point, it's like, we've talked about this lots on the podcast, but like, at the end of the day, who's responsible? you can complain and bitch and say, oh, the government has to do something, the police aren't doing enough, and maybe you're right. I'm not saying that they wouldn't be. It'd be great if they did more, but it's not realistic. Because of things like budget and rules and fear of repercussions and stuff like that. I think you'd have to go talk to a police officer. We have a lot of friends who are police officers. We trained with them. Friends are married to them. Like, we have a tremendous amount of respect for the police, all first responders. But at the end of the day, like, I think a lot of times they're scared to do their job because of what might happen to them. And I don't think it used to be like that 30 years ago. So, there's a whole lot more to unpack there as far as them and their inability to be able to do what they might want to do. But the bottom line is, like, they just can't. Not all the time, not every time. So then it falls back to, like, well, then who's ultimately responsible for preventing violent crime for you, your family, innocent people around you? It's you. End of the day, if not you, then who? Right?
Yeah.
It's fine. I'll take responsibility when we have concealed carry.
Yeah.
Alluding to a previous podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the part of that I think that I want to chisel out for people is, you can't rush past the fact of whether you believe violent crime needs to be curbed or not, because at the end of the day, there are measures in place that are theoretically intended to curb violence. You do have, a justice system. You do have jails. You do have law enforcement. You do have laws and legislation and all these things. But I think people are recognizing that, the systems are broken, the systems are overloaded, the systems are failing us, all that type of stuff. And so a man has to come to the decision and say, you know what? I'm not trying, I can't cure all violence, but if violence finds me, my family, other innocent people that I'm around, then somebody has to curb that. Somebody has to be prepared to meet that. And that just led me to exactly what we're talking about, which was taking responsibility.
I think, sorry, I'm going to interject
Okay.
really quick, but I think, when you talk about, like, well, I can't stop it all. It's like, to me, it's like, it's no different than the argument of trying to get people to vote. Like, yes, I personally can't vote anybody into power or out of power,
Yeah.
but is it still important to vote? Well, same deal. It's like,
Yeah.
I can't stop all violent crime, but I can help the people right around me.
Yeah.
And if there's enough people doing that, we're good, right?
And I think there's a little bit about the, people are waiting for the perfect time. Like, people are waiting for, like, almost like, you jokingly, Brad, you touched on, concealed carry, and, well, if we could get concealed carry, if they would just give us back our gun rights and, even extend them into where private citizens can carry concealed firearms, that would be that. Then now I could solve crime, because now I can be out there and, we have all these good guys armed, and violent criminals would be, now truly you would have taught them to fear their victims, right? And the reality is that it's just, you're not going to stop all crime, right? Because it is not just a broken justice system. It is not just people that are, making intellectual decisions to lead a life of violence and crime and all this type of stuff. There's a lot of other factors. I mean, inflation goes up, the cost of living goes up, everything goes up. You're going to see more crime. You're going to see more robberies. You're going to see petty theft. You're going to see all these, there is so many different stimulus responses that are at play in this, that you're not going to curb all violence, but you are looking for things that will allow you to have the biggest impact. And so, again, just men taking responsibility and saying, yes, okay, violence needs to be curbed. It's just an acknowledgement that, as a man, as a father, as a husband, facing the potential, violent criminal assault is a much bigger probability these days. And that's it. And then if you make that decision and that is a truth for you, then that leads you to only one decision that you have to make, which is to take responsibility and say, okay, this is my responsibility now. And then that decision leads you to the next decision, which is, okay, what do I do? How do I take responsibility? And that word's very powerful, responsibility. Okay, but I want to unpack that word a little bit later. So
Can I?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, you guys have both kind of touched on something that made me think about, like, talked about curbing. Like, we have things in place that are set up to curb violence, right? We have a legal system. We have all these things. But the one thing that I came in is like, well, where does it happen? Like, a lot of that stuff, like the legal system, in the moment is very past tense, in my opinion, right? So where's who's the first responder? Who's on the front lines with the responsibility of curbing violence? Is it the justice system? Is it the legal system? Like, where's, again? I know that we're going to talk about responsibility, but it's like, well, where's, how do you nip it in the bud, right? Not after the fact, right?
Yeah. Well, I think what a lot of people would say to that too is, I mean, of course, the next point I want to get into is the comment in the quote that says it is only the intended victim, and that's what you're alluding to right now. Is that we are our own first responders. We always have been. We always will be. This is the way that it's been. But what happens, of course, theoretically in a civilized society, is that one of the blessings, I guess, which would be a blessing if it actually worked this way, is that in a civilized society where you have laws and you have, law enforcement and you have, there's these, justice system and all these different things are in place, is that if you have an individual that commits a crime and that individual is captured, that individual is punished and is punished to the highest degree possible and befitting of that crime. And so in that, like you go to Singapore and, take a can of spray paint and spray paint on a wall, and you are going to be facing extremely, extremely severe consequences for that. And so therefore, in a society like that, you don't have a lot of vandalism. You don't have a lot of random violent assault, because now what they're saying is we have a justice system that actually has teeth. We have a justice system and we have judges and we have court systems and police and all this stuff where people are afraid. Violent criminals are afraid. You go shoplift in a market in the fucking Middle East and get your hand cut off. I mean, there's a lot of deterrent in then not wanting to steal. But of course, with some of these really strong kind of deterrents where you say, okay, you want us as your justice system, as your law enforcement, you want us to strike fear in the hearts of criminals, guess what has to be given up? Well, civil liberties, right? And then people say, well, fucking criminals have no civil liberties. Absolutely. At a certain point, committing certain crimes, do you waive all of your rights? And a lot of us agree, yeah, that's the problem, is that when you have 100% proof that this person committed this act, then fuck them. You know what I mean? Like, then there should be stiff penalties. There should be all that type of stuff. I'm just saying it's a convoluted system. And so it puts more emphasis coming, but when that system is broken and that system does not have teeth, and maybe a lot of people say the system favors the criminal, which is another thing that we could talk about. But then I think it does put the onus on the fact that it is only the intended victim who can do it, who can actually curb crime, which is something that we all believe in. Why? Because at the end of the day, what is training? What is the education of a weaponized man? Why invest in the education of a weaponized man? Why be up here at all, sharing information, knowledge, trying to provoke people to think, critical think, all that type of stuff? Is because when you train when you train criminals should be afraid of their victims. So anytime they pick someone and think, I'm going to fuck, that's my target, like Barry said in his, right? Like, private persons have a lot of power. And with the information and instruction, so with the training, right, this should strike fear into the heart of criminals. So, if we go from the violent crime, do you need to curb it? Yes. Take responsibility for it, recognize it, take responsibility for it. Is it, only the intended victim that can do it? I think fundamentally from that standpoint, or from the angle that we're looking at, I think it is. Because, it'd be great if the justice system and, the bail reform and all this shit got lined up and got, functioning, better, all that type of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're talking about one group of people, a wolf who targets another group of people, the sheep. And so you need the sheepdogs, and the more sheepdogs that you can have, the more you can have sheep learn to become sheepdogs. The harder it's going to be for the wolf. Right? The flock is going to become more protected. So I think those things are, to me they're self-evident, but not to everybody, but they should be. So if we push to the next line of it, in the fact that the felon does not fear the police and he fears neither judge nor jury, I think we've already kind of hit this a little bit, right? They don't have the fear because they understand the system's broken. But one of the other things that I would point out in this is when people say that that the justice system favors the criminal, I think that a lot of that kind of opinion is circulated because the people that say it and good people that are just out living their lives don't interact with the justice system. They don't know the ins and outs of it. Where you have these criminals, often repeat offenders, people that have been living in certain conditions and certain lifestyles since very early on. They're in and out of the courts. They're in and out of the remand centers and jails and all these different things.
And
And so there is there is loopholes in this system. There are ways to work the system. And if you don't know the system, then you don't get to work the system.
I think it's a little bit about what you said previously. It's like, well, to do this, you got to give up civil liberties, right, for the criminal.
Yeah.
And where it's like, well, it kind of favors, like, the legal system and justice system favors the criminal. It's like, well, I wouldn't say that favors the criminal, but they're still entitled to certain civil liberties. So I think that it's easy to kind of have that perception that, oh, it's like, well, it's like, no, they're still entitled to the civil liberties of a human being, and they also understand the justice system because they're in and out of it. But then when you have the general population, they're like, they don't understand it. But these guys are still entitled to civil liberties, even knowing that they are violent criminals.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I don't want to go too far off in this, but there's one thing historically throughout time that dictators have been able to do to a very high level of effectiveness, and that's make the trains run on time. That's keep populations safe to a degree, right? Because you can crack down on crime. If the goal is to have no, like, you want to be able to ride the LRTs and all that type of stuff and have no worry about violent crimes and being assaulted or having to deal with all this shit, oh, you can make that happen. You can make that happen real fucking quick. But when you do that, you're going to put in some very, very powerful restraints. You know what I mean? You are going to restrict people's movements. You're going to restrict their activities, their freedoms. You're going to restrict a whole lot of fucking shit. And for a lot of people that go, well, that's okay because I'm not doing these bad things. But you're going to put a lot of constraints on a lot of people, right? It's just like saying, you know what? You want nothing bad to happen at night? Curfew, 10 o'clock, everybody's in their house. If you're on the streets after 10 o'clock, they don't give a fuck why. You're going to fucking jail. Period. End of story. There is no excuses. Like, you will not have violent crimes happening after 10 p.m. Not like it might take a little bit, but depends how you want to rule that. And I don't want to get too far in this because that's not the topic for tonight. The point is just that I would tie it to this. All the time when I get people come in here, I get people that make these statements, and they make statements as if they're fucking hardcore facts. And most of those statements are just simply fucking not true. They do not understand their legal rights. They do not understand how to identify threats. They do not understand how to articulate threats. They do not understand how to shut the fuck up and wait and talk only to lawyers. They just don't know what the fuck they're doing. And when you don't know what you're doing, what happens is that you create a whole lot of fucking problems, right? Because you say things that are fucking dumb. You say things that get you in trouble. You say things that allow prosecutors to fucking prosecute. You say things that allow them to get convictions. Those cases change laws. You're doing a lot of dumb. Good people are doing a lot of dumb fucking shit because they don't know the system. They don't know what to say, and what they're working off of is just an emotion, right? Like, oh, this guy did this to me, tried to break in my house. Fuck him. I'm going to kill this guy. And it's like, in this black and white world where, like, my property is my property. You break into my house, fuck you. Like, whether you meant to do me harm or you just meant to steal my fucking DVD player, fuck you. Like, a lot of people feel that I'll just fucking put 2 bullets in your chest and that's the end of you. Okay, but like let's try to figure out what's going on in the real world here. It's not a kill or be killed society. And so you do have varying levels and degrees to threats, to use of force, to all these different things. So I just think, okay, if we're going to actually curb violence, and it is the intended victims that have to learn to strike fear in the heart of the criminals, I agree with the statement 100%. I just think that the second you start having this discussion, it just leads to a lot of inflammatory, statements. A lot of just like black and white, fuck them, break in my house, fuck you, I'll dig a hole, bury the body, and never say nothing to nobody and stuff. And it's like, these aren't solutions. Or they're solutions for a very different type of anarchy that's broken out in the world. And if it hits that point, then you won't have to bury the body because there will be no infrastructure. Everything will be broken down. Just shoot them dead and leave them lying in the fucking streets. Like if it's that point, why you're not hiding? Because there is nothing. There is no more law. There is no more fucking courts. There's nothing. Right? So in the meantime, though, what is better is when you actually educate and train and weaponize the intended victims. Like, information is not power in and of itself. Information is the basis or the catalyst for power, right? Sorry, it's the basis for power. What you need is a catalyst that transforms that information into functional action, applicable action. And that's when you now have power. It's the things that you can take action on, not the things you can just pontificate about, right? It's the things that you can actually take action on. And so one of the things I thought would be really interesting in this conversation tonight is, from your perspective, in the weaponization process, what are one or two or three or five things, but in terms of like almost like a hierarchy of order, that you think are the most powerful things that we give to average, quote unquote, average men that truly should strike terror into the heart of criminals? What is it? What is it? Is it a headbutt? Is it the killer instinct to be able to take life when legally, morally justified? The act of actually being able to kill, again, when legally, morally justified. Is that the greatest thing we give them? What are the things that actually you believe we give to people that you possess that violent criminals should be absolutely terrified of?
I think one of the first things that hits me is just, I think, is the willingness. It's what we talked about earlier. It's who's responsible. I think that's what we give people. We give people the ability, through both knowledge and just capability, like all of it, to be the one to be like, yeah, I will do something, right? I mean, we've talked in the past about, like, it's like that mama bear type kind of natural instinct, get between a mom and her kid, and it's like, could be a bad day for you, trained or untrained, because there's that willingness there. But we're talking, of course, about a trained, willingness to be a participant, let's say. And I think that alone is like a massive difference. You can take someone and give them all the physical skills in the world, and if the last thing they intend to do is use it against another person, that's pretty useless, right? So I think that's the first thing. I think there's a lot more, but that's the first one that hit me, is just having people willing to stand up and say, yeah, I will do something. I will take responsibility for my own safety, my family's safety, the people around me.
Okay. I'm going to push you a bit on this, and you can answer this now, or Brad, you can jump in and go, and then Dustin, I can circle back to you. But to me, the willingness is very general. And I know that you kind of alluded to some of the things that we'd unpack with it. But I see a lot of men that come to me that have the willingness, but they have none of the skill, none of the training, none of the knowledge, none of anything. I actually think if you had too many men out there that had the willingness with all of the other things missing, that would actually do more harm than it would good. That would create more anarchy. That would create more problems. So the question is then, what specifically, one or two things? Like even this, what if you have a guy who doesn't have the willingness? He has the desire he wants to have the willingness, but he's like, but I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. What actually gives good men the willingness to do it? Because again, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the ability to take an action in spite of the fear. But we still all know that you can have a guy that takes action despite his fear, and that's courageous. But it could cost him his life, and he could absolutely do nothing to change or make better the situation. He's not a life-saving force. He's just cannon fodder. He's just a really good man that just literally, someone's drowning, and he's like, oh my God, and he jumps in, and yet he doesn't know how to swim, so now they both drowned. So he had the willingness to save him, but that's not enough. So what is one or two pieces underneath the willingness, or what gives him? If there's a guy out there listening right now that goes, I'd love to do stuff like this, but in all honesty, I'm afraid of this. Like I believe I have some of the willingness, but I have none of the courage. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, what gives people the willingness to step into it? Because I've seen a lot, especially men, do a lot of dumb things and end up, they do stuff where it's like, why would you do that? Like, you're paralyzed, like whatever, like bad things happen. And well, I was willing, so I gave it a shot. That's, and in violence, that's not a good thing. You get what I'm saying. So I don't know if you want to jump in
Yeah, I
and
mean,
answer that right now, or you want to wait a beat. But
well, the first thing I'll say is I agree with you 100% in the fact that like willingness is just an ingredient.
yep,
Just because I have a bag of flour doesn't mean I can bake a cake.
yep,
Right. So,
yep.
but yeah, go ahead, Brad, and then we'll come back to it.
Yeah, I believe giving people the blueprint and the pre-incident indicators, like so the blueprint, and the reason why I believe that, because you're giving people the ability to identify violence and see it for what it is, and I think that by doing so, is what you're facing, and I know we give people a lot of things, but it's like, is this violence? Is this antisocial aggression? Is this, do you know what I mean? Like, so the ability to have the blueprint for people to identify what is happening and what is actually real in front of them, I think that is one of the most important things that we give people. I also know that we give people a playbook to deal with those things, but it's like, how do you identify what's in front of you? And I think that that's one of the critical things that we do.
Yeah. So I'll make a slight adjustment to that. You're talking the PIN index. You're talking about the pre-incident indicators. The blueprint is the sequencing of how they carry out the violence, right? So is that right? Or you're talking both? Or are you talking PIN index? Or are you talking blueprint?
Well, yeah, I think that where my explanation probably leaned more to the PIN index, right? For sure.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, because
So, yeah.
that's and I'm being really picky because I know what you're
because that's
talking
the
about.
moment.
I know what you're talking about, but I'm segregating it because if it's like I really want people like what do we want people to take away from this? Like I have my opinions on what I think should scare the fuck out of a criminal, and I believe that what I think should scare the fuck out of a criminal, most people don't understand it, would never say it, would never fucking think of it, have never had any training in it, and they would probably even the criminals themselves will not be able to understand the impact that knowledge and information is giving them. It's like, so now what happens is you have a violent criminal who thinks he's this dominating force and he steps into, the proximity of an apex predator. And they can't even see it because this information, like what you're talking about, Brad, like the PIN index, the ability to see the sequencing. Brad's talking about like the ability to read humans' body language, to read the interpersonal communication, to read their behavioral patterns. I mean, to read them because the PIN index tells us, first, is this a threat? So many people just can't discern this information. And then the second part the PIN index gives us is what level of threat. Well, those two pieces of information are fucking critical. Is this a threat and what level of threat? I mean, if you have a man who's armed with this information, what he gains is absolute fucking certainty.
Yes.
Because he's like, I'm seeing what this is. Now, the bad guy blueprints, of which there's 4, is the bad guy's playbook. It is how are they executing and carrying out assaults, murders, rapes, road rages, home invasions. I mean, they do this in a systematic way. So the PIN index is integrated into the playbook, but the playbook is a different piece of the puzzle, because if you stack this, imagine a guy who can see, is this a threat? And he can tell yes or no, yes. And what level of threat? And he knows this. And then in addition to that information, he starts to see the play formulate, and he understands scene 1, 2, and 3. Like, remember, the bad guy blueprints allows us to create an event horizon, which means you can go into the future and very accurately predict future events. Meaning you could go 5 minutes into the future. We can do event horizons where you can go a week, a month. You can, in military applications, law enforcement applications, and even civilian applications, they have event horizons that go a year or more into the future. I mean, this is the type of shit when you have these skill sets, when you start seeing things happening, that you can predict when somebody may or may not walk into the workplace and shoot the fucking place up. You're reading the PIN index, and you are understanding a blueprint for how people carry out some of the most violent crimes imaginable. So those two things are very separate things, yet very, very integrated together. And normally we do just talk about them as one thing, like bad guy blueprints, pin index. They're not synonyms for each other, but they're very interconnected. I just want people in this to be like, that's two separate things. And so all of a sudden, when you teach somebody one, and then you teach them the other, and they support each other, then you're going to layer in the next thing, and then you're going to layer in the next thing, and pretty soon people start to go, holy shit. You know, that's why I kind of said, what are your top 3 or 5? Because whatever Brad comes up with for his 2 or 3, and Dustin has 4 or 5, and I have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, and some of these will be the same. But now you go, you got 8 pieces, 9 pieces, 10 pieces. This is the education of a weaponized man. And we haven't even begun to talk about the things that everybody thinks we're going to talk about. You haven't said anything about teaching people how to punch and kick or how to break limbs with arm bars. It's like, well, because that is low down on the level. That's like the overt shit that violent criminals would be afraid of. But that's like seeing the tip of an iceberg. It's super impressive. Put your head under the water and you'll be blown away. You know what I mean? Because the mass is what you can't be seen.
You said something about the pin index, which is like what I 100% agree with, and that's it provides certainty. And with certainty follows, I believe, instantaneous, decisive action. So no matter what that action is, whether that is like an egress action or whether that's hey, this is a violent criminal assaulting me, it's like, you know exactly what's in front of you. Now you can make a decision, because I think a lot of people are standing there with their, you know, their hands in their pockets being like, well, what's in front of me? I have no idea if I should run, if I should fight, if I should yell or call for help. They don't, because they don't understand the index, they don't understand the blueprint and the sequencing of violence, that it's like they're left almost impotent. And I think that with those being on the front end, it's like, you know, and it does tie into what Dustin said about the willingness. Because if you have certainty, you have willingness. Now that willingness, like I said, could be to fucking get in your car and zoom away. Or it could be to defend your family, depending on, to the best of your capabilities, because you know where you're at. Right?
100%. Dustin, do you want to throw something down range?
Yeah, I think another really important one, you can kind of come at this two ways in a sense, is like when you talk about the idea of consent, or essentially lack of consent, meaning, you know, we teach people that you never consent to a fight. You don't consent to participate in this violent criminal act. And I think one of the big ways that we do this, there's a lot of ways, but one of the big ways is because we teach people asymmetrical strategies. I think that's something violent criminals for sure don't expect. They think, if anything, if there's going to be resistance, it's going to be more in that traditional sense of like consenting to a fight. You're trying to assault me. I am going to, like you said, punch you, kick you, armbar you. I'm going to try to fight you. But it's like you're forgetting the fact that these violent criminals are, you know, they're overwhelming, overpowering, outnumbering, out-equipping, out-positioning. Like, they have all the advantage. So if you're using symmetrical strategies, you're screwed. Like, you kind of don't stand a chance, right? So when you teach people asymmetrical strategies and to think asymmetrically, all of a sudden that's like a superpower. Not only because it makes you way stronger and better than what you really are, relatively speaking, but they just don't expect it. I mean, they choose their victims on purpose, right? They're looking for a certain type, a certain opportunity, and they just have no capability of understanding what that person might actually be able to do if they're properly trained.
Yeah, if I can throw something out there, like, you know, you obviously mentioned willingness, which is a huge, but it's like the umbrella, and we're trying to get to what's under the umbrella. So you're unpacking it now more, and so now you're talking about consent. And if I unpack consent even one degree further, because again, just, well, how do you do that? Like, the training methodology teaches you asymmetrical strategies, so that's a massive point. That is something that violent criminals should fear, because asymmetrical strategies, unconventional thinking. I mean, you just said it, and I can't say it any better, so I'll just paraphrase it back. But it's like, You have violent criminals who are looking for the right optics. I mean, they literally have the predator optics. They're trying to find two or three things that say this person is going to be the next meal, right? That this is totally my meal. And if and when they decide to attack, what you're talking about is they have been trained. So the wolf expects the sheep, to run. It expects it to like try to survive. But when all of a sudden the sheep does something that is asymmetrical, and not just asymmetrical, but is done with the intent and the design, that he just has no way to expect, that unconventional thought, mindset, emotional, like that is fucking powerful. Because again, like 80% of motivation is expectation. And so you're motivated to do something, and then all of a sudden you have a very fucking unexpected reaction from that. That is very tough to adapt to. So I really love the part of the consent, and the thing I'm building to is it's called classical conditioning. Like that's just one part of it. But let me ask you guys a question, right? Classical conditioning as opposed to operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a stimulus response, right? Pavlov's dog. Show the dog the food, the dog salivates because the dog's hungry. Ring the bell, right? And then keep doing that. And then the dog starts to associate the ringing of bell to the presence of food, the smell of food, that, getting the food. So it doesn't take very long before you can just ring the bell and the dog starts to salivate because his brain is like stimulus response. Oh, fucking time to eat. Classical conditioning is when you teach people how to feel about something. So if I use an example out of Lieutenant Colonel Grossman's book, back in the day in the Japanese War, right, they used to take American and British prisoners, and they would, have them staked up, and they'd have all the young unblooded Japanese soldiers, so the men that haven't had kills yet, and they would be surrounded by all of the men, the troops, and they would get them to bayonet these soldiers. And so just the cheering of the crowd, and they would bayonet these guys, which is a very horrific act. It's your knife, your bayonet is penetrated into another human being. So it's very tough to deny. You're at close proximity, the sexual range. It's very tough to deny and take accountability for the fact that you are killing another member of your own species, type thing. But what they would do is the second that they did this, not only were they receiving the cheers and adulation and triumphs from all of their other soldiers, their peers, but then they'd move them into huts where they had the best food, right, warm. They had dancing girls brought in. I mean, they basically just threw them a party. And really what you're thinking about is classical conditioning is they're teaching them how to feel. And say, listen, if and when you kill an American soldier or a British soldier, when you kill the enemy, all of the sounds, the smells, the feels, the touch, the taste, it literally lights up all of your senses in the most positive way. It's like going into a movie theater and watching a movie you love, and you got the smell of your girlfriend's perfume, or your wife in this case. I don't have a girlfriend, I have a wife. But your wife's perfume, you got your favorite treat, which is buttered popcorn, absolutely. You got the popcorn, you got the smell of the liquors, it's just all of these things heighten the experience. And so that's classical conditioning. That's a really long-winded way to go into say, like, how much classical conditioning has happened over the years within our organization and within our group? I mean, what do we do when we're together socially? Talk about training. What do? We talk about our beliefs. We talk about our right to life and the freedoms that we value to defend those lives. And we talk about our belief systems around all different types of things. Well, we're getting reinforcement. When we're training, we're around other men that think like we think, other men who are willing to protect, around other men who have really strong values and who have made decisions about, what is worth defending and protecting, even at the cost of my own life. Well, when you have another man that you respect, somebody that you're training with, someone that you're connected to in that way, and you hear them talk about their values and beliefs and how they feel and how strongly they feel, and then you see them training and working these things, and you're just experiencing all this stuff. Classical conditioning is at play. And when new people come in, most of the people that come in have never been part of a warrior culture. They've never been part of a group like that. Matter of fact, anytime they go to parties and they start talking about how they feel and things that they believe, there often leads to arguments, or it leads to people, condemning them, or canceling them with hypermasculinity and all this type of shit. And so now, if anything, they feel shame about it. They feel like something's wrong with them, whether they give a fuck or not. But it isolates them. We're social creatures. But the second you find a group of people that share those values, right, now all of a sudden, you have this consent. Now all of a sudden it's like, because what really allows somebody to defend themselves, up to and including lethal force? Well, it's going to come from it has to be legally, morally justified. So you have to see and understand, is this a threat? What level of threat? Imminent, grievous bodily harm, or death? Right? No ability to remove, de-escalate, or deter. But beyond that, you're not going to do it if you don't have a deep fundamental belief that what you're doing is right. At the end of the day, when you're talking about defending yourself and you're talking about potentially having to take someone else's life, no matter how big a piece of shit they are, I'm not about punishing people. That's not my role in this world. I'm not judge, jury, and executioner. I have no interest in punishing people. I mean, I'm human. Everybody has those feelings, and oh man, those motherfuckers, and talk about pedophiles and child sex offenders. And we all can get that thing in your head where you're like, you want to punish. But that's not our role. That's not what I'm about. That's not what a protector's about. So do you see how there's a safety catch built into the classical conditioning? Because we do hold each other accountable. We're not out here talking about vigilante justice. We're actually talking about, listen, we want to train and weaponize men, and we ourselves are men, that violent criminals, if they got half a fucking brain in their head, should fear. Right? Why? Because we are armed with the knowledge. We are armed with the classical conditioning. We are weaponizing and training with the operant conditioning. We are studying things like pin indexes and bad guy blueprints. We are learning and studying the criminal system and understanding what our rights are. We are connecting and studying, combat medicine. We are understanding and studying who the lawyers are that are best representative of us should we find ourselves facing criminal charges or facing even just the threat of a criminal charge, right? All of these different things, we are men that are preparing. And these are the little details that matter. And so most of the little shit, that goes on behind the scenes, it's not the glamorous shit. It's not the fucking physical, look at this guy, such a John Wick badass. It is all the relatively boring stuff that, most criminals would just never expect you to possess this type of knowledge or skills and understanding. And that to me is like, I think about that stuff, and I love when we do this type of stuff, the small details, because that's exactly it. And the best part is, it should terrify them, but they're too dumb. They're too dumb to even be scared of it. And it's like, that's perfect. That's just the way I want it. You just don't have an expectation that there's an average guy out there that's doing this, or average men that are doing this. And this is our mission.
That's what I said. I'm like, it's like the superpower. You know what I mean? It's great if you have it all and they know you have it all, you're still in a really good spot. Yeah. But when they don't know you have it, so much more powerful. 100%. So much.
Yeah. I'm going to throw one of mine down range too right now. And again, these are not in any particular order, but the self-regulation, the inner control box, and I'll be very specific because I've been asking you guys to be very specific. I'll take 2 out of the 4. Self-talk and imagery, performance imagery. And I'll be even more specific. Tactical self-talk and tactical performance imagery. Self-talk to human beings is so critical. Just how do you talk to yourself in every facet of your life? How do you see things? Like, the theater of your mind is always working. We think in terms of images and symbolism and shapes and all this stuff. That is what's creating our reality. But specifically, I want to talk about tactical self-talk and tactical performance imagery. I see the difference every single day when I start teaching people what their tactical words need to be. Like, what are you saying to yourself in this very specific moment? Whether it is the context of pre-contact cues, so it is not hit a point where it is a violent assault is taking, we call it the point of no return. It has not crossed into the physical part yet. So whether it's just the simplest feeling of being uncomfortable because there's the potential threat of something, which may be low level, may be high level. We have yet to determine it through reading the pins and all that stuff. But in that moment, we are talking to ourselves. And when you teach men in crisis, even from the lowest level, the earliest onset, to start thinking tactically, you allow a man to take control over his emotions. We are emotional creatures. Emotions unchecked will lead to reactions. Amateurs react. That means that the criminals have access to all of your buttons, and they will push those buttons, and it will lead good men to make bad decisions, reactive decisions that will often, and say things reactively that will often get them into really, really, really big trouble. And so when you can regulate the self-talk, and when you can regulate the performance imagery, and the performance imagery, so the self-talk keeps us on point, keeps us in the moment, and will allow us to take strategic and tactical actions. Make strategic and tactical responses, not react. And the performance imagery allows us to see ourselves solving problems. And that's a general way to say it. It's tough to explain it in only a few words. But it's like motivation is 80% of motivation is expectation. What you see, how you see yourself handling, moving critical situations, life and death situations. This is what's going to motivate, again, but doesn't talk about the willingness. This is a massive part of where willingness comes from, because you have trained into them and created into them an avatar. Because again, in the theater of our mind, we all see ourselves some way. We all picture ourselves as like I am statements. We have an avatar running in the theater of our mind. We have bracelets that say I am a protector, ready, real, resilient, relentless, and ruthless. Why? Because that feeds our avatar. We have, we've earned core, this whole thing, but it feeds the avatar. So the performance imagery is every day I see it when guys come in. Their self-talk is untrained and unrestrained or non-existent. It's happening, but they have zero conscious awareness of it. And their self-image is horrible or non-existent, especially as it relates to tactical work. But every day when you just start using what we call the fuel formula and you start teaching them this process, every day it just grows. It just grows and grows and grows. And 6 months later, a year later, you have a completely different human being in front of you. Now you mix that with the classical conditioning, with understanding and reading the PIN index, with teaching people the bad guy blueprints, right? Which teaching people, it just stack. Even just hopefully what we're saying right now, because we can't go through every little thing. So we've made about 4 points, maybe 5. But if anyone that's listening to this, if you're sticking with us, you should start to have created, like you're hearing what we're saying, and you are in your own mind's eye, creating an avatar based off what we're saying. And now if we go back and say, listen, the felon doesn't fear the police and he fears neither judge nor jury. Therefore, he must be taught to fear his victim. And now you think about what we just talked about, the type of human being, the type of man that we're talking about creating and weaponizing. That is somebody that those fuckers should fear. And this becomes the goal. Training is the only way to actually get, the criminals to start being afraid. But we need so many more good men to start fucking training. We've said this a million ways, just to take responsibility, start fucking training, just put in the work. It's not what they think it is, and it's not the hard charging part of it that really is the mass. It's it's the small things that you have to do and educate yourself on and stuff. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's kind of the way I see it. I don't know if you guys want to throw something else in that, polish that up a bit.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so I think then, if there's nothing to add, if you guys have nothing to add on it, then I think we'll just land the plane from here. But yeah, I don't know if I have a final thought per se. I think it's just kind of summarizing what I've already said. Yeah, I would say it this way, right? I love the term average man, actually. I know often I put it in quotes because part of me believes that when you put in this type of work, whenever anybody puts in the type of work and training hours and thought and all the stuff into the developmental process, you're not average, because average people just don't do stuff. They just live average lives. But I also love the term average because, you know, I'm not in the military. I'm not theoretically, I'm not out in the front lines. I've been very blessed and fortunate over 30 years to work with a lot of guys that are for first responders, you know, tier one military guys, law enforcement guys, and a whole fuck ton of civilians. And I don't see any difference between them. Their job is different. I definitely acknowledge the difference in the jobs and the challenges that those jobs bring. But at the end of the day, one of my favorite sayings is at a certain point in time, it doesn't matter what your job is. You become a man fighting for his life or fighting for the life of other innocent people. And in that moment, you know what I mean? You need those skill sets. So I take a lot of pride in being, you're right. Like, what am I? You know, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a friend, I'm a son. You know, I run a business, I raise in my family in a city, and there's problems in the city, and there's crime in the city. And, there's all these different things that happen. And at the end of the day, these criminals need to start fearing their victims, and I don't see us as victims. What we could be is the potential intended victim, and they're going to find out real quick that we're not victims, because victims are people that don't know what to do. And so when they get victimized, they stall out. They have no choice. They don't know what to do. Any one of us could easily become a casualty of violence, but it is a big difference between being a casualty and a victim. Because you can take the best trained soldier in the world, he can step foot on that battlefield and take a bullet through the head and never get his gun out of his holster. That does nothing to take away from the quality of warrior that he is and was. You would never call that man a victim. He was the casualty of war. Why? Because he was ready to fight. To be a victim, they have to break you mentally, emotionally, and physically. If they just destroy you physically, but they never destroy your belief in the right to life, they never destroy the freedom that you believed in and executed on to defend that life, that's just your body falling in combat, right? They cannot make a victim out of you. So, for me, this is the process, this is the way, and this is the mission, is to give more and more people these skill sets, these knowledge, to just become those life-saving forces in dark, critical moments, right? So anyways, at the end of the day, weaponizing and the weaponization of an educated man, everything from our podcast to our training privates to everything we fucking do, is teaching criminals to fear their victims, right? Because they're going to target the wrong person. And that's what we need. We just need more, wrong persons out there for them to target, so to speak. So, all right, guys. Anyways, we'll wrap it up here. I love this. I love the concept of this. I love the quotes. I love the sayings. And I'm just going to make one last point because I had it underlined for Barry's thing. And I love that Barry left it with an ultimatum. It was so black and white. And so maybe I'll read that line again. But I just love when he says, these criminals, you're either going to get caught, you're going to go to fucking jail, you're going to get your ass kicked, you're going to spend the rest of your fucking worthless life on a feeding tube or fucking dead. So if those outcomes, right, do not appeal to you, then you must stop committing crimes, turn yourself in, admit your crimes, accept your punishment, and turn your fucking life around. I loved it. It's like, this is what we're doing now. And for each of us, I think we can say that. This is what I'm doing. Here's what I believe. If you fuck with me, right? If you fuck with my family, if you fuck with any one of these guys' family, anything like that, if you do that, you need to be afraid of your intended victim, because you're going to get fucking ass kicked. You're going to spend fucking hospital on a feeding tube. You're going to, or dead. You know what I mean? It's like you're going to get caught. You're going to go to jail. Like, it's all of it. Fuck you. Those are your outcomes. Or change your life, turn yourself in, admit you know what I mean? And I love it because when you read that, people would go, what criminal is going to fucking stop committing crimes, turn themselves in, admit to their crimes, accept their punishment, and then turn their lives around? Well, none of them, but I love it because it's almost like what he's telling you needs to be done. They won't do it. And if they don't do it, fuck you. It's us versus you. Like, that's what it is, right? It's not the criminals preying on society. It's society versus the criminals. Fuck you. Like, doom on you. They think evil, doom on you. That saying is so fucking powerful to me. And that's what this is about, right? That's what our mission is. So, All right, I'll leave it there. Anyways, thanks, Dustin. Thanks, Brad. Appreciate you guys, as always, sharing your knowledge and time. For everybody that listens and watches, we appreciate you so much. Like, share, comment, and that's it. So, till next time, stay safe, stay weaponized. We're going to chat again soon, everybody.